What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another SQL tutorial. Today, we're going to be talking about CTEs. A CTE is a common table expression, and it's a named temporary result set, which is used to manipulate the complex subqueries data. Now, this only exists within the scope of the statement that we were about to write. Once we cancel out of this query, it's like it never existed. A CTE is also only created in memory rather than a tempdb file like a temp table would be. But in general, a CTE acts very much like a subquery. And so if you know how to do subqueries, you should be able to pick up on CTEs fairly easily. So let's get started writing our very first CTE. We're going to come down here. I'm going to say with, and we're going to write CTE underscore employee. And we're going to say as, and this is where everything's going to start. Now, CTEs are sometimes called with queries. I've never personally used that, but I've seen it called that online. But that's because it uses this with statement right at the very beginning. So now we have with CTE employee as, and then we have an open parentheses. And now we have to construct our select statement. And this is kind of where we build out our quote unquote subquery. And so I'm going to take in a select statement that I actually used in a previous video where we were using the partition by. And so I'm going to put that in there and I'm kind of walk us through what that does and how we're going to use this. So I'm going to paste this down right here, and I'm actually going to go like this just to make it look a little nicer. And then I'm going to close the parenthesis at the end. So now we have our CTE in place. And as you can see, it is basically just a select statement within the with CTE employee as. And what this is going to do is going to take the first name, last name, gender, and salary. And then it's going to take this aggregate function with the partition by, aggregate function with the partition by, and it's going to place it to where we can now query off of this data. So it's putting it basically in a temporary place where we can then go and grab that data. So all we're going to do at the very bottom is we're going to say select everything, and we can do that from CTE employee. So let's run this entire thing and see what we get. So as you can see, this select everything from CTE employee, we are selecting everything from this select statement. And so this feels a lot like a temp table. We were actually querying off of a temp table, but it actually acts a lot more like a subquery. Now we don't have to do the select everything. We can just do first name and let's do average salary. And when we run this, we'll just get those two columns, and we don't have to go through and actually write this out each time. It's just in this CTE for us. So it does all the heavy lifting within the CTE, and then we can just query off of what we want. Now, something to note is that the CTE is not stored anywhere. And so it's not stored in some temp database somewhere. If I try to run just this by itself, it is not going to work. So let's try that out really quick, and we should get an error. And that's because each time we run this query is actually creating the CTE again. And so it's not being saved anywhere. And so each time we run it, we have to run it with the entire CTE. Another thing to note is you actually have to put the select statement right after the CTE. If I try to go down here and say select everything from, let's do CTE underscore employees, it doesn't actually work. It's not going to come up at all. And that's because it only is going to work with the select statement directly after the actual CTE that you've created. I hope this was helpful, and I hope that you understand how to use a CTE a little bit better. Again, you don't have to go super complicated with the select statement within your CTE. It can be very, very simple. I just wanted to demonstrate that you can use aggregate functions within your CTE and then just query off of those without having to do the aggregate function again, which I find is very, very useful. Again, thank you for watching. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next video. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another SQL tutorial. Today, we are talking about stored procedures. Now, what is a stored procedure? A stored procedure is a group of SQL statements that has been created and then stored in that database. A stored procedure can accept input parameters, and we will be looking at that today. But that means that a single stored procedure can be used over the network by several different users, and we can all be using different input data. A stored procedure will also reduce network traffic and increase the performance. And lastly, if we modify that stored procedure, everyone who uses that stored procedure in the future will also get that update. Let's start writing out this stored procedure so we can look at the syntax. We'll start off very simple, and then in the next one, we'll get a little bit more complicated. So the very first thing that you need to write is create and then procedure. And after that, you're going to name it. So let's just call this one test. And all you're going to say is as, and then you're going to write your query. And so let's just do select everything from employee demographics. And that is it. We have created our very first stored procedure. Of course, this is super, super simple, but let's execute this really quick and take a look at it. So it says that the commands completed successfully. Let's go over to our SQL tutorial. We're going to go over to programmability, stored procedures, and it is not showing up there. What we need to do is we need to refresh our stored procedures. We're just going to go right here. We're going to click refresh, and then there is our stored procedure. Now, how do you actually use this stored procedure that we just created? So let's go right down here, and let's say X, which means execute, and then all we're going to say is test. And we're going to run this, and there we go. So all we put in the stored procedure was a select statement. And so when we actually ran the stored procedure, it returned our select statement. Now let's go down here. We're going to make it a little bit more complicated. We're going to do the exact same thing in create stored procedure. Make sure I spelled that right. And let's call this temp underscore employee. So if you remember from a previous video, we worked on temp tables and we created our temp tables and then inserted data into that. We are going to add that to this stored procedure so we can see the difference between a simple query versus a little bit more complicated query. So I'm going to say as, and then I'm going to insert that in here. Now, what this is doing is I'm creating a table, and then right down here, I am inserting that table. Now, if I create this stored procedure and then execute it, nothing is actually going to be returned. It will insert the data into that temp table, but since I don't have a select statement in this stored procedure, nothing will be returned. So let's write select everything, and we'll just do from, and this is temp employee. And right here, and so now let's create our stored procedure. So that created successfully. Let's refresh over here, and let's execute this. So let's just go down right here and say execute, and it's going to be temp employee. And now we will execute this. And there is our output. Now, really quick, let's go into temp employee, and we actually want to change this stored procedure. So we're going to go over to modify. So when we modify it, a few things are going to show up on your screen. The first thing that you're going to see is it says use SQL tutorial. So it's just specifying the database. The next two things you may not be as familiar with, it's set ANSI nulls and then set quoted identifier. If you don't know what these are, it's not super important. The first one just talks about how to deal with nulls when you're using the where statement. And then the quoted identifier just talks about how it uses quotes in the actual query itself. Again, not super important, but they have those automatically turned on. Let's go down a little bit further and we're going to look at the alter procedure. So we created our stored procedure, but now we want to alter it. So this is the alter procedure. And we are going to add a parameter to this. So what the parameter is going to allow us to do is when we're actually executing the stored procedure, we can specify an input into that stored procedure so that we get a specific result back. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that in just a second. But let's actually add our input. And we're going to say we're going to say job title. And we need to specify the data type that is going to be. So let's just say nvarchar 100. I know below it says varchar 100, but that's not extremely important. So this is going to be our input. So we need to go down here and say where job title is equal to @job title. So when we actually are executing this and we say the job title is equal to, let's say, accountant, this is going to become accountant and it's going to give us our results based off of it being an accountant. So let's go over here and we're going to click this execute temp employee, which we just modified. And when we run it, we're going to get an error because it is now expecting us to include our parameter of job title. So what we need to do is we need to say @job title, and let's say it's equal to a salesman. Now let's try running this one and see what we get. And so there is our output. If we go back here, I just wanted to show you really quick, we do not have to put this job title right here. You can put this anywhere in the query and use it however you want. That's how parameters work, and that's why parameters are so useful. And you can use multiple parameters for one stored procedure, so you don't have to just limit yourself to one or none. You can put as many as you really like. So I hope that this video is helpful and that you understand stored procedures just a little bit better. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next video. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another SQL tutorial. Today, we're going to be looking at string functions. Some of the things that we're going to be looking at are things like trim, replace, substring, and upper and lower. We're going to create a new table, insert a little bit of bad data into it, and then we're going to be using that to work on our string functions today. So I already have this set up right here. I'm going to put this in the GitHub so that you can just download this. You don't have to, type this out manually. So go look in the description if you just want to get that off the GitHub and download that and copy and paste it, save you a little bit of time. But let's go ahead and run this really quick. And as you can see in this table, we have our data right here. Give me 1 second. So in this employee errors table, basically what we have, actually, let me pull this back up. Basically what we have is in this first one, we have, here we go. We have some basically blank spaces on the right side. And the second one, some blank spaces on the left side. We also have Jimbo, which is an error because his name is Jim, and Halbert because his name is actually Halbert. And then for Toby, for whatever reason, that O is capitalized. And then Michael got in here and added this extra part. So we're going to have to figure out a way to take that out when we're doing our query. And that'll come in a little bit later, I think, in the substring section. So let's get into it right away. Let's start using our left trim and right trim. And we're going to kind of go through each one pretty quickly, hopefully. I'm not trying to make this a super long video because we got a lot of things to get through in this one video. So I'm going to go through the trim, right trim, and left trim. Let's look at the employee ID because that's the one where we have some blank spaces on the right and the left side. The left side, you'll be able to, obviously, you're going to see that one much easier, but let's start walking through this. So let's do select employee ID. And before we get any further, let me just get the employee errors on here so we can, so that we can see everything as it comes up. So we're just going to do trim and then type in the column that we want to take these blank spaces out of. That's what the trim does. The trim gets rid of blank spaces on either the front or the back or the left and the right side. So on both sides, that's what trim does. And we'll say as ID trim. So let's run this one really quick. And as you can see, this is our regular employee ID. And so, you can't visually see it as easily on this first one, but there are blank spaces after this 1001. And we got rid of those. And then there were blank spaces before the 1002, and we got rid of those. Now I'm just going to copy this 2 times because it's basically the exact same thing, but I'm going to show you them all at the same time. So it's the exact same thing except L trim and right trim. And let's take a look at all these at the same time. And let me pull it up. So in the let me see if I can get these all in here. Okay. In the trim, it got rid of both the left and the right side. So all of these were fixed. In the employee ID for the left trim, we're only going to be getting rid of this one. This one still has blank spaces on it. And when we do the right trim, we're only going to get rid of the stuff on the right side. So this one doesn't change because this is on the left-hand side where the blank spaces are. So this one was fixed. Again, it's not super visual, so you can't really see it, but that one is fixed. Let's move on to the next part, which is using replace. So for this one, we're going to be looking at the last name. So let's go back up really quick to the employee errors. As you can tell, the last name, the biggest one where we kind of want to take something out of because we don't want that, that dash fired still in there. We're going to replace that. And so let's look at how to do that. Let me just copy this real quick and get rid of this top part. So we're going to do the last name. So let's just start off with our last name. And then just as a baseline so we can see what it looks like before. And then we'll do replace. And all we're going to specify is the column that we want to do the replacing in. We're going to specify the value that we want to replace. So in this, it's going to be dash fire. Oops, got a little aggressive on that one. Dash fired. And we're going to indicate what we want to replace it with. Now I'm just going to replace it with blank. And we can say as last name fixed. So let's see what this looks like really quick. And it looks like it worked. So in this last name, it originally had Flenderson dash fired. And when we replaced it, and we took that dash fired and replaced it with basically nothing, it then fixed it. And so now it looks correct. All right, let's move on to the next one. I think this one might be the longest one to write, but that is the substring. And let me take this real quick, trying to save us some time. So substring is very, very unique. You can specify in either a number or a string, you can specify the place that you want to start. And then you can also specify how many characters you want to go out. And it pulls that in. So just as a really quick example, and then I'm going to show you kind of a use case for this one that I think is pretty cool that, maybe, let me see. So that maybe that you'd find useful. So I'm going to do first name, and then I'm just going to do 1, 3. So it's going to take the first name. It's going to start at the very first letter or number, and it's going to go forward 3 spaces or 3 spots. So let's just take a look at what that looks like. So for our table, it's going to take Jim, Pam, and Tob, or Tobe for Toby. And so it's only going to take the first 3 because you're starting at number 1. Now, what if we started at 3? So we do 3, 3. It's going to go to the third digit or third letter, and then it's going to go forward 3. So you kind of get a sense of how this works. Now, I'm going to show you something that I think is very interesting that I think you guys will also find interesting. Let me fix that because I just messed it up. So if you've ever heard of something called fuzzy matching. Now, if you don't know what fuzzy matching is, I'll give you an example. Let's say in one table, my name is Alex, and in another table, my name is Alexander. If we try to join those two together based off of my name, they will not join because one is Alex and one is Alexander. They're not an exact match. But if I take the substring and start at position 1 and move forward 4 characters, it's going to take Alex from both, and then it will match them together and say that they are the same. So that, it may not be perfect. That's why it's called a fuzzy match, because it can work for a large majority of the time, but it's not going to work every single time. And so I want to show you how we can use this here. Really quick, I need to join this to the demographics table. So I'm going to do that really quick. Bear with me for just 1 second. Let's try to make this at least look somewhat good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by saying, let's tie it to the first name. Let's do error.first name is equal to the demographics table first name. Okay, so I want to see, and I'm just going to do first name for error, and let's do dem.first name. So let's see what comes up when we do it like this. So the only one that is going to work is Toby. And that's because even though it has a capital O, it's still going to take it. So, we want to get all of them to match. And we can do that, but it's going to be in a little bit of a different way than maybe is perfect. But that's why they call it fuzzy matching. So we're going to use substring on this. So I'm going to say substring. Oops, let me spell that right. So I'm going to say substring, and we're going to go 1, 3. So starting at the first position and going forward 3, and we're going to do the exact same thing on the, substring. Would be great if I could spell that correctly. And we're going to do the exact same thing. So 1 and 3. So we are actually going to take this. Give me a second, missed that. We're going to take this up here, and we're just going to go like that. And why did I copy it with the error? Okay, so let's run this really quickly. And as you can see, it is now going to match all of them. And you can do this on a lot of different things. Typically, when I'm doing a fuzzy match like this, I'm not just going to do it on a first name, right? Because there can be a ton of people named Jim. We want to do it on, and real quick, let me actually show you what the originals looked like, just to make sure I hit the point across. And that is going to be first name and come. All right. So real quick, let's actually look at this. So it originally was Jimbo, Pamela, and Toby. And this one was Jim, Pam, and Toby. And so when we just took the first three, because it was Jimbo, it then becomes Jim, it was Pamela, it becomes Pam. Now it matches. And so that's kind of the example that we're going for. Like I was saying, I typically will not just filter on a first name because there's going to be a ton of people named Alex or Jim or Henry or whatever. You're going to do this on many different things. So I would be doing it on things like if I'm trying to do a fuzzy match on a person, I do it on their gender to make sure that their gender is the same. And I wouldn't probably need to use a substring for that, but just to kind of give you a little bit more information, I need to do it on the last name. So I'd need to use that substring again, and I would probably do it on the age. Oops. What am I doing? Come on. The age and the date of birth. Okay, so all of those things, if you fuzzy match on the first name and then the last name, and then the gender, the age, and the date of birth are all the same, then you can typically get a very high accuracy in matching people across tables, whether or not you have, this is an example if you don't have like an employee ID, which is what we do have. But take, for example, we were not given that. This is a way to match them using substrings. Let's move on to upper and lower. All upper and lower is going to do is basically take all the characters in the text and make them either upper or make them lower. So it's very self-explanatory. Let me copy this up here and we will get going on this one. Let's just look at the first name. Specifically, we're going to be looking at Toby right here. So let's do first name. Let's do lower. And all we have to do is put in the column that we want to do. So this is our original first name. And it then takes every single string that is in here, or every single, I guess, character, and it makes it lowercase. That's all it does. And it is the exact opposite when we do upper. So we can now take a look at this one. And now everything's going to be capitalized. So there is a lot that you can do with these string functions. And this is not all the string functions that there are. There are a lot more. But I would say that these are the more popular, more useful ones that I typically use on a regular basis. And so I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that you learned something from this. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe below. I have a lot more videos coming out with tutorials on everything from SQL, Python, Tableau, and Excel. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another SQL tutorial. Today, we are going to be talking about subqueries. Now, subqueries are often called inner queries or nested queries, and they're basically a query within a query. A subquery is used to return data that will be used in the main query or the outer query as a condition to specify the data that we want retrieved. You can use subqueries almost anywhere. You can use it in the select part of a query, the from, the where. You can also use it in insert, update, and delete statements. But in today's tutorial, we're only going to be looking at the select, the from, and the where statements, and you should get a pretty good idea of how to use it in those other statements. All right, now I'm going to paste on screen basically what we're going to be walking through today. But really quick, let's just take a look at the table that we're actually going to be working in, and that is going to be from the employee salary table. And I just want to show you the data that we're going to be working with before we actually get into it. So we have an employee ID, we have a job title, and then we have a salary. So really quick, I'm going to show you what it looks like to have a subquery in the select statement. So let's go down here really quick. And what we're going to try to do is kind of do something like a Windows function, but without actually having to do the Windows function. And so we're going to do this with a subquery. So I'm going to select, and really quick, actually, let me copy this. So we're going to do employee ID. There we go. We're going to do salary. And now we can start building our subquery. So we need to do an open parentheses. And I'm just going to copy this really quick because we're going to be doing it off of that table. So we're going to say select, and then I'll paste that and close it as well. But what we want to do is we want to say average and salary. Now, what this is going to do is it is literally going to run this, and let's run this really quick. It is going to run this and is going to show that the average salary for all the employees is $47,909. So we are looking at the average salary for every employee. So when we run this, it is going to give us the employee ID, the salary, and then in the very last one, it is going to show the average salary for every employee. Now it doesn't have a column header, or a column name. So let's give it, let's say as all average salary. And we'll run that one more time, just to make it look a little prettier. You can also do this in partition by. I'm going to just really quickly write this out. It should take no time at all. And then I'm going to show you why we can't do this without the subquery, why you aren't able to do this with a group by. So really quickly, let me copy this. I'm going to put it right down here. And we're going to say average salary. Whoops. And we can get rid of all this. And we can say over, and we're not going to partition it by anything. But let's run both of these at the same time. And you'll see that they're the exact same outputs. And so it's just a different way of doing it in this example, but it really is just to show a comparison of how you might be able to use a subquery in the select statement. Now you might be wondering why group by does not work for this. Really quickly, I'm going to write this out, and let's get rid of that. And we'll say group by, whoops, let me at least try to write it correctly. Group by, and we'll do employee ID. And we also have to do salary. And then we'll say order by 1, 2. So let's run this. And as you can see, since we have to use the group by, it groups by both the ordered ID and the salary. And so we're not going to be able to get that all average salary that we're looking for, that we can get in the partition by and also the subquery in the select statement. Now I'm going to show you the subquery in the from statement. So let's just get rid of that really quick. And let's say select everything. Let's say from, and we're going to do an open parentheses here. And here is where we're going to write our subquery. So if you have watched previous videos where I've done tutorials on the CTE or tutorial on the temp tables, this is one that is very much like those, except I think a little bit less efficient. When I'm doing something where I'm creating a table and then querying off of it, which is what we're about to do, I much prefer a CTE or a temp table. Subqueries tend to be a little bit slow compared to a temp table or a CTE. I tend to use temp tables a lot more because you can reuse them over and over, whereas a subquery you cannot. You have to write it out each time. So really quickly, I'm going to show you how it's done, although I don't really recommend using this method. Really quickly, let's go up here and let's steal this partition by really quick. This will be our subquery. And let's paste this in here. I'm going to make this look a little nicer just so you can visualize it a little bit easier. So really quick, what this is going to do is it is first going to run this and create this table. Again, much like a temp table or a CTE. So let's execute this really quick. It's going to create this table and then it's going to allow us to query off of it. So I can actually say, and let me give kind of an alias to this, a.employee ID, and then let's say all average salary. So now I can take columns from this inner query if I want to and just select those, or I can select everything and return that entire table. Again, I much prefer a temp table or a CTE for this type of situation, but as an example, I just wanted to show you how it works. Now let's go down to the subquery in the where statement, but really quick, I just want to steal this query so I don't have to rewrite everything. And let's get rid of this really quick and add back the job title. All right. So let's look at this really quick. So we have our table that we've been using, our employee ID, job title, salary. So for this example, we only want to return employees if they're over the age of 30. And as you can see in this table, there is no age column. That is in the employee demographics table. Now, if we wanted, we could join to that table and get that information, or we could use a subquery. And so for this example, we are going to be using a subquery. So let's go right down here and say where employee ID is in, and we'll do an open parenthesis. And now this is where we are going to build out the subquery. So just for visual purposes, I'm going to go right here. I'm going to say select everything, and we'll do from employee demographics and close the parentheses. So we're going to try to select something in this subquery that will then identify the employee IDs that are over the age of 30. So really quickly, let's take a look at this table. So right now we have the entire table selected. So we have the employee ID, first name, last name, age, and gender. So in this subquery, the only thing that should be returned is the employee ID. And in fact, in your subquery, you can only have one column selected. So I can't select everything. I have to specify one column. And that's a little bit different than how we did it in this from statement, where we were basically able to select the entire table and then in the select statement specify what columns we wanted. In the where statement, we can't do that. So we want to return the employee ID, and we also want to say where the age is greater than 30. So let's run this really quick and see if it works. As you can see in the results, these are the employees who are over the age of 30. Now, if you wanted to display the age as a column in this output, you would have to join to that table and then put that column or that field in the select statement. But in a lot of situations, you won't actually want or need to do that. And so a subquery can be a really good option in these scenarios. With that being said, this is the last video in the advanced SQL tutorials. I hope that this series has been helpful and that you learned something along the way. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next video. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another SQL tutorial. Today we are looking at temp tables. And if you can guess it, based off of the name, they're kind of like temporary tables. And we create them very much the same way. We're going to do create table. It's just a little bit different. And you can hit off of this temp table multiple times, which you cannot do with something like a CTE or a subquery, where you can only use it one time, or with a subquery, you need to write it multiple times within a query. And so these temp tables are extremely useful. I'm going to kind of talk about how you can use them as we're going throughout this video. But let's get started right away with actually creating one, looking at it, inserting some data, and kind of showing you how temp tables work and what we can do with them. So we're going to start off with create table, much like a regular table is created. The only difference is we're going to do this £, and then we're going to do temp _ employee. So literally the only difference between a regular table and a temp table is this right here at the very beginning, this £. So let's just start by doing employee ID. We'll make that an integer. We'll do job title, and we'll make that a varchar 100. And then we'll do salary. And let's make that an integer. And so now we have our temp table. Let's go ahead and create it. So now we have our temp table created, and so we can look at it really quick. So let's select everything from, and we'll do temp employee. So let's take a look. It's completely empty. And we can insert data very much the same way we'd insert data into a regular table. So let's start doing that. Let's do insert into, and we'll do temp employee, and we'll do values. And let's just do something really quick, because I'm going to get to a little bit more interesting stuff in a second. Oops. So we'll make this person HR. That's their job title. And then for salary, we'll give them 45,000 and close it off. So let's run this and let's select everything again and see what's in there. Perfect. So we were able to insert data into this temp table. And again, we don't have to create this every single time or we don't have to run this every single time we need to hit off of it like we did a CTE, if you watched my previous video. And this one, we can just run it and it sits there. And so again, it feels very much like a real table. And I'm going to get to a little bit of the nuances of the differences between a regular table and a temp table in a second. But let's really quickly, we want more data in there. You don't have to just do it value by value. We can also just do where we select all of the data from a specific table and insert that into a temp table. And that is really quickly, how I do it most of the time. Most of the time, I'm not inserting values. I am, taking a large table and taking a subset of that and then sticking it into a temp table. So let's look at this really quick and run that. So now we took all of the data from employee salary and then we just stuck it into this table. And really quickly, this is one of the big uses of a temp table. We had, let's say, for example, that this employee salary table had 1 billion rows or just an extremely large number. And we were trying to, hit a somewhat complex query off of it where we're using joins and we're using maybe some window functions or different things. It would take a very long time to hit off of this. But what we can do is we could insert that data into this temp table, and then we can hit off the temp table and it already has that subsection of data that we're wanting to use for all of our later queries. So really quickly, that's kind of a use case for that. So let's go down here. We're going to kind of create another one. And this one's going to be a little bit more advanced and a little bit of how I would actually use a temp table. Above was just kind of showing the basic syntax, how you kind of put data into it, kind of how it's used. Now I'm going to show you kind of how I would actually use it. So let's do create table. Let's do create table. Let's do temp employee 2. And then let's do open parenthesis and we'll do job title and we'll make that a varchar 50. And then we can do employees per job. We'll make that an integer. Now we need average age, make that an integer. And the very last one will be average salary. I'll make that an integer as well. And let's run this. Oops. So we have our second table. Now we want to insert data into this one. So we're just going to do insert into, and we'll do temp employee 2. And for this one, I'm going to take a query that we used in a previous video. And so I'm just going to copy and paste that to save time. And then we'll keep on moving from there. All right, so I'm just going to paste that in. We will run this, and really all it's doing is from these tables, it's taking the job title. We're getting a count on the job title, average age, average salary, and that is it. So let's see if that worked, which it looks like it did, but let's actually take a look at the data. And so now we have this subsection of data from this join above. And what this is going to do is whenever we want to run this, we don't have to run it on these two tables and create the join and then do the calculations, which takes time. What it's going to do is it's going to take these exact values and place this into this temporary table. And if we want to run further calculations on these values, we can easily do that in a fraction of the time instead of having to run this every single time, which will take up so much processing power. And it will reduce your runtime dramatically when you're placing this data in this temp table and hitting off of that instead of all these joins and everything above. A lot of times these temp tables are used in stored procedures. Now, if you haven't learned about stored procedures or used stored procedures at all, that's okay. I still want to show you something that might be useful, although this is used a ton in stored procedures. So for example, let's say we have a stored procedure set up. We run the stored procedure and we get an output, and we, for whatever reason, want to run it again. And when we run it again, we get this error. And this temp table lives somewhere. It doesn't live in the actual database, but it lives somewhere. And so when we run it again, we get an error because there's already a temp table created. One trick or one little tip that I would give is doing something like this, saying drop table. Oops, I don't know why I did so many spaces. Drop table if exists. And we'll do temp employee 2, just like that. Now, what this is going to do is when you're running that stored procedure over and over and over again, you're getting an error or whatever. For whatever reason, you need to run it multiple times. Every time that you run it, it's going to encounter this. And so if that already exists, it is going to delete that table and then allow you to create it again. And this is just a really good thing to do. So now if you see down below, I can run this time and time and time again, and it is going to work every single time because it is checking to see if that exists. And if it does, it deletes it, and then I can create again. And so that is just a helpful tip if you're going to try to use this. I highly recommend adding that to your query just to make sure things run smoothly. I know there is a lot more that can go into temp tables, a lot more of the technical aspects or the DBA stuff. Obviously, I just want to teach you how to use it and what you might use it for and how to actually write it out. But there are a lot more things that you can do research on about processing speed and storage. But unless you are something like a DBA, you probably don't need to worry about those things. And so if you are a DBA, I do recommend looking into those things, making sure you understand how that works, how this data is stored, so that when people use them or you are using them, you know what's going on in the background. But for getting up and running with temp tables, I hope that this was helpful. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next video.